Well, hello, Cedar Village. Guess what? For this week's Torah portion, we are back in the regular cycle of things. We just have had weeks of holidays. That's right. If you remember, after going through the summer, talking about the different Torah portions each week, we then had Rosh Hashanah. We did have one final Torah portion we discussed before Yom Kippur. Then we had Sukkot, then we had Shmini Atzeret, and guess what? We are back at the start of things with Parashat Bereishit, also known as Genesis. It's the very first Torah portion in the entire cycle. This is the beginning of the Torah. This is the very beginning of the Hebrew Bible, the book of Genesis. Now, the Torah reading of Genesis, this very first one, starts with the beginning of the world, as well as the beginning of people and certain other creating the world, people, really cool stuff. I want to focus on, for the purposes of this video, of this conversation, really to talk about people. And also, I want to talk about coupling to some degree as well. So I'm going to set aside, maybe for a future discussion, talking about the creation of the world without talking about the people. I want to focus on the people. Now, in the one of the first interesting things. Oh, also I want to say I'm trying out this manner of teaching. I know over the summer I did a lot where I would on the screen have the texts both in Hebrew and in English and be talking. I'm trying something different and as just having me talking to you so you don't have to see text. I would love your feedback. Call me, email me, knock on my door, send notes, whatever it is. I want your feedback. So please tell me, hey, Rabbi Drew, I like this aspect, not that aspect. I really didn't like X, Y, and Z. Please tell me. I want to hear your feedback so I can make these videos on the Torah portion more appropriate and better geared towards you. I've been here not even 5 months yet. So I'm still learning the ropes, and I want to make content that really speaks to you. All right. So, we have in the first chapter of Genesis, we have in verse 26, God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth." So then, God then created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Them. He created him. Yes, he created him, male and female. He created them. Okay, that's a really fascinating thing. But let's back up. Here in chapter 1, verse 26, God said, "Let us make man in our image." Now, this is fascinating for a variety of reasons. One is, what is the image of God? What does that look like? And I'm going to get back to that. But the very first thing in the Hebrew says, "Naaseh Adam b'tzalmenu," right? Let us make man. Now, this is a really fascinating language. Who is God speaking to, and it almost to some degree sounds like God is even asking for permission. This is really fascinating. Who does God need to ask permission from? Right? Who? So, in the Midrash, the rabbis of the 3rd, 4th centuries of the Common Era said, you know what, maybe, this is really fascinating, maybe God was using the angels as a sounding board, or maybe like an advisory board of sorts. God was consulting the angels. Hey, we should do this thing. So there's this really fascinating Midrash, this rabbinic narrative expansion. So here we go. When the time came for the Holy One, blessed be He, that's God, to make the first human being, the ministering angels made themselves into competing councils. Some of them said, "Don't create humans," and the other said, "Create them." So which sides were these? And the rabbis actually specifies these. So they say the angel of kindness says, "Create humans, because they will do acts of loving kindness." Then the angel of truth said, "Don't create humans, because they're going to be full of lies." All right, it's 1-to-1, equally balanced. The angel of righteousness said, "Create them, for they will establish justice." The angel of peace said, "Do not create them, for they will be in constant strife." So 2 versus 2, right? So you have, on the one hand, you have kindness and righteousness, and on the other hand, you have truth and peace. Truth and peace are really good things, right? They are great values, truth and peace. And yet truth and peace in the rabbinic imagination are counseling against the creation of human beings. Okay? So what did the Holy One, blessed be He, what did God do, right? You have a face-off, 2 versus 2, a standoff. God took truth and flung it to the ground. He just hurled it to the ground. Whereupon you have a 2-2 deadlock, now it's 2-1. Okay? Whereupon the ministering angel said before the Holy One, blessed be He, ruler of all worlds, what have you done? Why have you chastised the chief of your court? Let truth rise again from the earth. That's really fascinating. So this is deeply fascinating because, I mean, the image of like God picking up one of the ministering angels and just like flinging him to the ground is a really interesting act of adjudication, right? Of just saying, you guys, we can't just remain in a deadlock tension. We're going in one direction or the other. And ultimately we get 2-1. So, all right. I find that's super duper fascinating as far as this rabbinic imagination of having an angelic standoff of figuring out, should humans be created? And God making the decision of, we're going ahead and we're going to do it. Okay. So what is this whole image thing, right? Let us, like I mentioned in chapter 1, verse 26, God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. B'tsalmenu kidmusenu, just as we look. What does God look like? What's really interesting is the way that it turns out in the very next verse, right? In verse 27, and God created man in his image. So God executes on this. B'tsalmo b'tselem Elohim, bara oto zachar nekeva bara otam. So what is it? Is God creating both a male and a female, or is God creating just one of them? There's a deep ambiguity here. There's another rabbinic midrash, because the rabbis are, I think like anybody, deeply fascinated by this concept. Like, what does God look like? But also, like, is this a singular creation or is this a dual creation? Do we have separate male and female, or is male and female just one? And one of the things, ultimately what they come up with is to say that, well, really, there's actually several possibilities. So one possibility is that when God, what is God's image and how does God create male and female? Well, actually, it was one person, one individual being that possessed both male and female characteristics. So the rabbi said, well, was it like a hermaphrodite, right? An androgynous person with both male and female characteristics, one united human being that had both? That's one rabbinic possibility. Another possibility is that they had their backs to each other, right? You have a male and you have a female, and their backs were to each other. So they had both male and female, but it was one singular, indivisible creature, right? So these are a couple of rabbinic images as to, like, how do you parse these two verses of what does that look like? What's also deeply fascinating to me is not saying that the image of God is only male or only female, but the complete image of God is to have a combined male and female, right? You have both. That you can't just have a male that males are not in the image of God alone, and nor are females, but male and female combined create the totality, the totalness of what it means to be in God's image, according to this first chapter in the book of Genesis. So then, I'm just going to read for you verse 28 and 29. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on the earth. And God said, see, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit. They shall be yours for food, and to all the animals on land. This is verse 30. And to all the animals on land, to all the birds of the sky, and to everything that creeps on earth, in which there is the breath of life, I give all the green plants for food. And it was so. And God saw that He had made and found it very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. So that's the creation of humankind. Now, what's interesting later on, and I'm going to go to chapter 2 now, as we see in verse 7 that God formed man, or this person, from the dust of the earth. And God blew into this person's nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living thing. So maybe God had in chapter 1 created initially this person that had both male and female characteristics, but needed the breath of life to make it operational, right? To make human beings go. Now, what we later see, and we see in chapter 2, verse 18, if you want to follow along in your apartments, you can grab a Hebrew Bible and read along, or you can just listen along. I'm fine with it. Hopefully you're okay with it as well. We have verse 18 in chapter 2. The Lord God said, "It is not good for man to be alone. Lo tov heyota adam levado." It's not good for man to be alone. I will make a fitting helper for him. Okay? So what would this be? In verse 19, God, the Lord God, formed out of the earth all the wild beasts and all the birds of the sky, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them, and whatever the man called each living creature, that would be its name. Now, I know you're wondering, like, what does this have to do with, we just went from finding a helpmeet, and now all the animals are coming before man, and he's giving them names. That's not really helpful, at least on the surface of it. And the man gave names to all the cattle and to all the birds of the sky and to all the wild beasts. But, now we're going to come back to it, for Adam, no fitting helper was found. Okay, I think there's something deeper going on with the whole naming thing, as far as what does it really mean to give names. I think that's a separate conversation, but I think for now that there was a sense that Adam really, in trying to assess and give names, was trying to figure out, is there a possibility that each of these all the animals, could they be a potential help meet, or like a companion basically for man? But ultimately, as we see in verse 20 in chapter 2, no fitting helper was found. Okay, so we need some God action going on. So in verse 21 here in the second chapter, the Lord God cast a deep sleep upon the man. So he basically put man out, right? Almost like anesthesia, just he's out. And while he slept, God took one of the ribs and closed up the flesh at that spot. And the Lord God fashioned the rib that he had taken from the man into a woman, and he brought her to the man. Now, I have to explain something, which is, it's really actually not clear how to translate this Hebrew word that ultimately results in rib. Okay, so in the Hebrew, it's tzelah. Okay, this word tzelah, it could also be taken to be understood as a side. So I mentioned earlier that one of the rabbinic conceptions, one of the rabbinic midrashic conceptions, or these narrative expansions, right? One of the rabbinic narrative expansions views either this primordial man, like this first Adam, as either could be an androgynous, like a hermaphrodite, someone possessing both male and female sexual characteristics, but also something where you envision the male on one side and the female on the other, right? So you have this dual-sided creature possessing both male and female sex characteristics. But what if, not rib is to be understood here, but what if sides, right? What if when God put man down to sleep, that then God split these two parts apart, and now they could be with each other, right? They could actually not have to find another creature to, spend time with, to being a helpmeet, but really that they can now connect and be partners. So then the man said, and now we get to verse 23, "This one at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for from man was she taken." Now, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense in English. In the Hebrew, it's going to make better sense, because in the Hebrew, it is Ishiru. It is Isha. Yikra Isha ki meish lukachazot. Okay? That it's also fascinating, because why is man called Adam? Why is man called Adam? Because he came from Adamah. He came from the dirt, right? So we saw earlier in chapter 2 that God creates man, Adam, from the Adamah, right? It's one letter difference. He basically came dirtward, or from the earth, right? So you came from the earth, so you now get Adam. And then this man, then the man were now, so it's also fascinating. I didn't explain something. Up until now, this first person, and I'm going to be it's very gender neutral. This first person was created with both male and female characteristics, but not called a man. Okay? It's just the first person. And it seems to be that this first person had both male and female. This first person had both male and female characteristics. Now, once this separation takes place from whatever these sides are, it doesn't have to be a rib. Different translations for whatever this word is of tsela could be rib, but it could also be side, right? It could be these two were now separated out and created separate sides. That you have an ish, you have a man, and an isha, a woman. That a man is whatever a man is, but an isha came from the man. Really fascinating. And then finally, we get to verse 24, and therefore a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife so that they become one flesh. So the imagery that results from verse 24 is that the man leaves his parents, goes off, does his own thing, and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. And that this one flesh is like this recombination of back to when Ish and Isha were originally Adam, that they were originally this person, right? Not only this person, but actually in the image of God. I also find it really fascinating that in verse 24 here, it just takes it as granted, and this is how it works. And this is why man leaves his parents. Well, why does the man have to leave his parents? Why can't the woman leave her parents? But it doesn't explain the mechanics of exactly why it has to be one way and not the other. But it is still fascinating as far as the man and woman going back to each other and clinging with each other. It's sort of this recombination of the image of God. I also want to go back to something I said, which is, one little thing I do want to point out. We have here, I mentioned in verse 21 that God cast a deep sleep on a man. That's the first time we see sleep taking place in the entirety of the Hebrew Bible. And this word of tardema, it's really a deep sleep. We don't actually see it popping up that much in the entirety of the Hebrew Bible, but it pops up from time to time. A more typical word for sleeping is like yashan, shena. That's sleep. That's more typical. Tardema is like a deep slumber, like really, really, you're out. You're super duper out of it. Okay. I do want to go back to one of the really cool facets and aspect of the language here. So this is back in verse 18 and still in chapter 2, where God said, "It is not fit for man to be alone. It is not good for man to be alone. I will make a fitting helper for him." Okay, so this is nice, but in the Hebrew it actually works better, because here in the Hebrew it says. So the last part, lo tov heyot adam levado, so it's not fitting for a person to be alone. E'eseh lo ezer kenegdo. I'm going to make an ezer kenegdo. So what does this mean? Ezer is a helpmeet, is a helper, but kenegdo is really fascinating, because neged can mean corresponding to. It can mean kind of like a cross or corresponding to. I think that might be the most accurate translation, is to say corresponding to. But it could also be kneged, like against. And so one of the really fascinating rabbinic insights into this expression is to say, well, if a man and woman are getting along together, it's that she helps him. It's more focusing on the ezer aspect, right? The help aspect. But if they're not getting along, then it's more that they are kneged each other, that they are against each other. So I think that they take this ambiguity in the language as far as an ezer kenegdo. How do you have a helpmeet that's against someone? It's not that they're against someone. It's more that it's a corresponding helper, that they can work together. But sometimes, as we see in relationships, there is some helping, which is great, but there's also antagonism and some friction that can occur in relationships sometimes. But that's, I think, a really fascinating aspect. You know what? I'm going to go one step further, which is the language of ish and isha. Now, I mentioned before the Isha, that it comes from the language here in the second chapter of Genesis. The Isha, because she's coming from man. Now, they are spelled slightly differently. So in Hebrew, they actually have 3 letters each, okay? So Isha Ish, man, is spelled Aleph, Yud, Shin. Okay, Aleph, Yud, Shin, that's man. Isha, woman, is spelled Aleph, Shin, Hey. Okay, they both have 3 letters. And the rabbi said, and they're inspired by this Ezer Kenegdo piece, as far as men and women, and when they work together well and not. So they say, there's actually similarity, because 2 out of the 3 letters in each word are the exact same. And there's 1 letter in each that are distinct. So what they said is, when man and woman they're residing happily together, they're doing well, the unique letters come out. What are the unique letters? Well, there's the Yud in Ish, in man, and the Hey in woman. So you get Yud Hey. Well, Yud Hey is another way of expressing God. So there's a certain godliness, and that God dwells between them, and things will be well. But if there's no God involved, and you take the Yud Hey out, you take God out of the picture, you just get Aleph Shin. Aleph Shin is Aish. What is Aish? It's a fire. And when you just have fire in that relationship and no God, then things can burn apart. So that's, I know they're just playing with letters, playing with words, but it's still nevertheless a really fascinating insight into how similar and yet different these 2 terms and expressions are. So some interesting things when we think about the creation of humanity. I want to say not just creation of man. I think I want to be really explicit. I want to be really clear here. We're not talking about man's creation and then woman coming necessarily from him. Really, the language is more going towards God created Adam, that God created person, and that this person, Adam, came from Adamah, came from the earth, right? So earth was here first. God pulled a little bit of earth, created Adam, this first person, blew life into this person, but that this first person had both female and male sexual characteristics. Then God had to split them apart, getting Ish and Isha, getting man and woman. And that the combination of man and woman is in God's image, but that not one or the other alone can necessarily be in God's image, and that there's a certain togetherness that really can make that happen in combination. Really super fascinating from the first 2 chapters here in the book of Genesis and thinking about the creation of people. So if there's one thing you learn, it's not the creation of man, it's the creation of people, or this primordial person, as it were. So I want to say thank you so much for watching. Please let me know your feedback. If you like this style better, you don't like this style better. Some people might be visual learners and want to see the text on the screen, and that might be something that's more appealing to you. So please let me know. All right. Well, thank you so much for watching, and Shabbat Shalom.